Back on Warmer Plus. It's still me, Aniela Alute. Joining us in the studio is a special guest. We have sports medicine specialist, Dr. Prince Pambo. Dr. Prince, good morning.
Good morning.
I mean, Dr. Prince, is like your fashion sense is also really out there.
I wasn't told how to appear. I thought it was sports, so.
I mean, it is sports, and this is a very, 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 very nice outfit.
He's almost going to wear it.
Oh, no, he's always dressed to kill. Regardless of the occasion, if you give you out the chance, dressed to kill.
Sure.
Definitely.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I'm also very happy to have you here. Now, Dr. Prince, I've always wanted to ask this question particularly because we always see that, well, it's expected that sportsmen are one of the most fit in the world because they're always up and going. But sometimes we hear of instances, and we even see it on the pitch when they just suddenly collapse or they're saddled with some sort of situation, and we wonder how exactly did that happen. So I'm wondering if that's attributed to some underlying condition, or if you overexert yourself as well, then it is harmful.
Right, thank you. So this has always been a question we would have to address. I mean, and most people try to even use that as a reason not to engage in any form of physical activity. Let me just put it on record here that the best medicine you can offer yourself will be physical activity. So we need to promote that. Yes, sports people are supposed to be the most fit people. I mean, they are exercising day in, day out. So for someone to suddenly collapse on the pitch of play, most of the time there would have to be an underlying heart problem, which would then be triggered by anything associated with physical activity. Not necessarily the exertion itself, but probably other activities or processes associated with the exertion. I mean, it could be normal dehydration, so you've lost a lot of fluids to the extent that it can trigger some of this sudden collapse. Let me also add that it's not all sudden collapse we see on the pitch of play that will be attributed to a heart problem. Some could be concussion. You probably go for an air challenge, an elbow to the head, you drop, and then you go off for some time. Some could also be due to hunger, which we will call hypoglycemia. Probably going into the game, players get so anxious. Some pastors might have told them to even fast before a game, so they probably have a lot of fluid and sugar imbalance, and then they go into the game. So hypoglycemia even can cause them to collapse, which has nothing to do with your level of fitness or any heart problem. I mean, it could also be due to excessive heat, so when the temperatures are so high. So if you realize in some tournaments, we introduce cooling breaks and all that just to curtail that. But what I need to say finally on this is the fact that we normally will have a lot more sedentary people or people who are not physically active sustaining sudden cardiac arrest and dying. Okay. Compared to those who are physically fit, But then we see a lot of the sports people, because if one goes, it's global news. Everybody gets to hear.
In the limelight.
Exactly.
Talk about
but if you go to Kolebu, Konfanoche, Reed Hospital, on daily basis, in quotes, ordinary people are sustaining cardiac arrest and dying. So it shouldn't be a reason not to exercise. But
Doc, would that mean that upon studying a particular player, you would not necessarily prescribe certain exercises for him?
So if you do your pre-competition medical assessment, which would involve the cardiovascular evaluation most of the time or all the time, and there's a need to vary a player's level of activity, you need to engage that. But this is something that normally doesn't happen, because if the person is competing top flight and you find anything wrong with their heart to the extent that you need to vary the person's activity level, then you are probably inching towards advising the person to quit professional sports. Because, really, if somebody is a top basketball player or a top football player, it's going to be difficult to say, whilst your colleagues might be doing a lot of sprinting, you don't have to, because, they're going to compete. And which coach would want to have a player like that in their team? So mostly we don't come to the point of varying physical activity based on a heart problem. If it's as a result of an injury, maybe you're going through some rehabilitation, then that comes as a temporal measure where we say probably for the next 1 month, if you come on the pitch of play or if you are training with a team, these are the things you are allowed to do. But if it has to be a lifestyle in quotes, or a physical activity lifestyle, then the person might not be qualified to play at that level.
Doc, just a final one on the heart issue before we move on to other things. I mean, the defibrillator, I find it very difficult to mention that.
We know just say AED.
AED.
Yes.
Okay, so
that's right.
So the AED is supposed to protect the heart. Right?
Yes,
exactly.
It's supposed to save.
Okay.
Yes.
But in Jomina's case, he still went off even with the different. So what could have been the problem? Right.
So we wouldn't give too much details because we don't have Raphael's permission to do that. So I mentioned somewhere when you have that device in there and you still keep getting episodes of sudden collapse, then you've got into a time where the person concerned, the family, the agents, the team managers, and the doctors taking care to sit with this client, in this case Raphael, and then have hold a very critical discussion. Okay, so what it means is that what the device is supposed to be doing, it's either not doing it well, or whatever problem which was identified for which that device was implanted, either the problem has gotten worse or there is a new problem causing what? The collapse rather than what the device was correcting. Amazing. So there will be the need for a re-evaluation of what the problem is and then have that all-important discussion. And I've mentioned also here that, I mean, once you keep adding on days to your age, then whatever medical problem one will have, naturally, it will just tend to get a bit worse or probably more difficult to handle, or your ability to sustain some level of activity begins to diminish. For instance, if previously I went to the gym and I could do 80 kg, I mean, at some age, you'll be hurting yourself going in and doing 80 kg. The same way, I mean, if you diagnose with a cardiac problem, an implant is there to help you and years keep coming on, it's just right that a re-evaluation be done. And then, so one, treatment or management will have to be adjusted, level of activity will have to be adjusted. And when these two come close, then you realize that the person is getting to a point where you need to hold that all-important discussion. Yourself, your family, your doctors, and your team managers.
Doc, now let's come to very basic injuries we hear in sports every day. I mean, you hear that a player has torn his hamstring. You hear that a player has
strained it.
Exactly. You hear that a player has an anterior cruciate ligament injury. I mean, just touch on a few of that for us.
Right. Thanks so much. So I mean, the body of the sports person and the various parts are the tools they use to work. So if you are a 100-meter sprinter, you need those hamstrings to power you. If you are a footballer, to be able to beat those 3 seconds, get to that ball before your opponent, you need those hamstrings to power you. You need those knees to be able to bend, be very flexible enough to be able to run. Okay, so just saying you need all parts of your body to work. So just as a vehicle we buy and use for commercial purposes would develop a flat tire, would have to change oil, you have to change engine and all that. So, I mean, it is with our players. So so the first thing we tell you is that once you've taken on this profession, injuries are part of it and you need to be prepared for it. So the various parts, I mean, we have bones, I mean, very basic. So once there are bones there, so you have fractures. You have muscles. So once you have muscles, the muscles will tear. I mean, which we'll call a strain. You have your ligaments. Once there are ligaments in there, so if I take the knee, for example, I mean, you have bones there. So there are two long bones down here. There's one long bone here. There's a flat bone here called the patella. Right. All right. And then you would have ligaments, which are the cruciates. So they go like that. Okay. So there's one in front, there's one behind. And they actually hold the lower bones and the upper bone here together for you to be able to do that kind of swing. And then on the sides, you would have ligaments as well called the collateral ligaments, one there, one there. Then in between the bones, you have some cartilages or structures we call meniscus. Right. Okay, so they act as shock absorbers and they provide nutrition for the joint. So all these structures will come together to make sure that it's a healthy knee. All right. Once you get into sports, basketball, football, volleyball, they will definitely get injured. All right. So the commonest injuries, I mean, I did a study in our premiership somewhere 2012, 2013. The commonest injuries we see on our side are ankle injuries, basically due to bad tackles and then poor nature of our pitches. So there's a ligament called anterior talofibular ligament right there. So once you do that movement or you're running and somebody steps from behind, you do that, definitely you pull off some of those ligaments. And it tends to be an injury that worries a lot of players. I mean, it doesn't take you out of play completely. So most of the time, I mean, you have a bit of pain. Players will tell you once they warm up, the pain goes, so they don't treat it well. So you realize most of the time you have to bandage it, you have to do some taping to go on and on. By the time it's taking you out of play, then it takes much longer time for you to come. The cruciate ligaments are very easy to tear, especially the anterior one. All right, and normally it's something that happens. I mean, you probably go for an air challenge, you are landing, you don't land well, and then the knee twists, and that's it. And you normally will hear something like a pop sound. So if the doctor sitting on it, and mostly we doctors who sit on the bench, you don't really enjoy the game. You're just looking for mechanisms of injury. Because once the player goes down, or any sport, once the athlete goes down, you need to see that mechanism, and then straight away you know. So mostly you realize that whilst we are even running towards, we are able to signal to the coaches that this one has to be changed. Sometimes you know that the player has that weakness. So once that happens, you know that the player can't continue. So you go 1 second, you do your quick assessments, and sometimes you speak to the player. Most of them will tell you, I can play. You have to tell them you can't, and bring them to the side and be able to adjust. So those ligaments also get injured a lot. I mean, so mostly it's the anterior one that does a lot of work, and that one actually tears a lot more compared to the posterior. And then those meniscus also, I mean, it's more like a crushing injury, a crash injury. So you jump, you hit, and then the bones crush it, so you'd have some degrees of tears, I mean, grade 1, 2, 3, and on and on. Then when you have that, they will tend to have something called like locking of the knee. So the knee doesn't, it's not as flexible as it is. So those injuries are all there. I mean, with hamstring, most of the time you realize that they get them when they are taking off. So you realize a player is going, I mean, top speed, about scoring a favorite goal, and all they do is that they just hold that, and they can't do anything about it. It's also common in our 100-meter runners, and then they hold it, you know. Basically, so these are some of the injuries you will see in sports. The bones will break, the ligaments will tear, the muscles will tear. I mean, you get concussion, the heart can seize, and all that. Those are not injuries anyway. So basically, that's it.
Doc, just before Anela comes in, I mean, sometimes you hear some of these injuries. A player can go a month, other players can go 3 months. Players go for a year.
Right.
Is there a mechanism to check which player comes back quicker, which player comes back longer? What's the
right? So a lot depends on the injured part or the structure involved. So technically, for instance, if there's just a simple fracture of a long bone, maybe the bone here, there's a simple fracture, not broken in 2 different places, and it's probably broken nicely, if I should use that word. I mean, the textbook tells us straight away that if there's a fracture, you put in your cast and all that. Maximum, I mean, there will be 6 weeks for the bone to heal, Then you probably need, I mean, probably a couple more weeks to be able to rehabilitate the player and then bring him back to play.
Right.
Okay, so if it's a bone problem, I'll say, okay, so 6 weeks, probably plus another 4 weeks. We'll say, okay, 10 weeks, I can be able to bring you back to full form, okay? Versus if I go and I do my assessment and it's a ligament, okay, like the cruciate ligament, and also depends on the level of tear. If it's a complete tear, which needs surgical reconstruction, then obviously you're going for the famous 9 months.
Nice.
Okay, if it is a partial tear, which might not need surgery, and they will probably need only rehab, physiotherapy, then you are probably looking at less. Okay, where the individual factor comes in, there are players with, okay, you are going full 9 months. Sometimes by 6 months, the player is almost doing everything right, okay? So then it tells you, okay, so this player's body, okay, is healing faster. He's probably sleeping more. He's eating the right things. He's taking his rehab more seriously. There are also some at the end of the 9 months, you go and do a re-evaluation and you realize that no, the person probably has to go probably another 3 months. So the person is doing 1 year. So there is a role the individual would have to, so I mean, if you have a headache and I give you medications, I mean, if you take it, yes, you get your relief. If you don't take it. So there are also some players when it comes to discipline, when it comes to the rehab, sleep, they will not sleep. They will be in the pub, okay? So you're not going to get it the way you want. So it depends on the structure involved in the injury and then the level of rehab and, of course, the expertise of the doctors, the physios, and the massage therapists who are working on you, or versus if you have to seek other help from other sources, you only complicate it.
Amazing.